continuing to look at the use of the Old Testament in the book of Revelation with the thought that John does it intentionally, the way he repurposes, the way he uses and repurposes the Old Testament. He's trying to describe things in the visions that he's been given that are beyond description. There is no vocabulary. So the best he can do is connect it back to what he knows and what a lot of people then knew, and that is what we call the Old Testament. So what we've been doing is running down what John is saying and where he gets it from, what his source is. And what we're finding is that we have found that while it's true that there is more Old Testament in the book of Revelation than all of the other New Testament books combined, and that is a fact, he never cites it like most of the New Testament writers do, according to Isaiah, according to whatever. They quote, and they give an introductory setup to it. He doesn't do that. Nor does the Revelation ever quote an entire passage, an entire verse. But what it does is it borrows here and borrows there, never taking things out of, never violating their context. But John apparently knows his Old Testament so well, and of course he's inspired by the Holy Spirit. But he knows his material so well that he's able to borrow here and borrow here from different sources, and he puts it all together. He uses what I'm calling bits and pieces of pictures and metaphors and references. And sometimes he does it from the Hebrew, but very often he does it from the Greek version, the Septuagint of the Old Testament, which flavors it a little bit differently. And we find that there are times when John intentionally uses bad grammar. He knows grammar. He's also the author of the Gospel of John, which is there's a reason why first-year Greek students begin with John 1, because that is some of the easiest Greek to translate because it follows most of the rules. You do not begin with Paul. Paul abandons the rules. Paul has sentences that go on forever, and then they go off on tangents, and then they come back again. Not so with John. His Greek is fairly pure. So he intentionally chooses in the Revelation to use bad Greek, and when he does that, he most often is tipping us off that he's using the Septuagint. He's using the Greek version of the Old Testament, and he's trying to flavor it like the original Hebrew, but in Greek. And so that's a device he uses. But he uses the Old Testament over and over again. You can hardly read any passage in the Revelation without bumping into something from the Hebrew Scriptures. So anyway, that's what we've been doing. What we haven't been doing is trying to determine using the book of Revelation as an end-time calendar. We haven't been doing that, but what we have been finding is if we will take the much longer route, which is doing what we're doing, running down the Old Testament in the Revelation and trying to guess at why John used it that way and why he stopped at that point and why he picked it up at that point. Anyway, what we're finding is that if we do it that way, which admittedly is a little bit more a lot more time consuming than coming up with a calendar and trying to fit everything into a calendar. If we will do that, it does begin to show us some patterns about how the consummation of the age may take place, and how some of those events that are mysterious to us may actually unfold. Anyway, so that's what we've been doing. We have been in Revelation 6. We're in Revelation 6 again tonight. We're going to begin at verse 12. But thus far in Revelation 6, we've been introduced to the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and found that they are very much of a repeated pattern that occurs in the Old Testament, a pattern of conquest, civil unrest, that leads to famine, that leads to death. And you get some of that same pattern, those parallels in the Revelation with these four horsemen. we found out that the fact that the last of the horsemen kind of summarizes, or the fourth seal is called, the opening of the fourth seal that presents the last horseman, kind of summarize, not kind of, but does very neatly summarize the first three, has kind of led us to the idea that flies a little bit counter to the way a lot of people read Revelation. They see the events unfolding in Revelation as sequential. In other words, this happens, then this happens, then this happens. First horse, second horse, third horse, fourth horse, first seal, second seal, first trumpet. What we're discovering is, from some of the internal evidence, that it might be better to think of these things unfolding in a simultaneous way rather than a sequential way. Anyway, that's what we worked through the last couple of weeks, and we left it off last week, 6 of Revelation, 9 through 11, finding these souls under the altar that were murdered for the name of Christ. They're martyrs, and they have been rewarded already in part. They have their white robe, which is a signifier of membership. The divine beings wear a white robe. Those holy ones wear a white robe. Human holy ones wear a white robe. So we left off with them. A little bit of discussion about which altar we're talking about, because this is a temple scene. It uses the temple as a template here for understanding, and we kind of settled on the idea that of the two altars, the altar of the burnt offering, which you found in the tabernacle and in Solomon's temple and again in Herod's temple, there's also an incense altar that is inside the holy place, and it is sitting right next to the curtain, and that puts it positionally right next to, although on the other side of the curtain, right next to the mercy seat, the throne. Kind of interesting that the throne that's presented there is one of mercy, but the altar of incense is there, and so that probably is the altar that's being referred to for these martyrs that are under the altar. They're in a place of protection. Though the worst has happened to them, they've given their lives for Christ, they have been protected, and they are close to the throne. Anyway, that's where we left off last time, with John assuming that we have a pretty good amount of knowledge about the temple and its furnishings. Anyway, let's press on a little bit further and take a look in Revelation 6, 12 through 17 is where we're going to be for, I think, the rest of tonight anyway. I don't think we'll get off this. So let's take a look. Revelation 6, 12 to 17, and for those that are watching online, you don't have the advantage of our study guide that we in person do. What we're going to look at tonight is the dissolution of cosmos, the language that surrounds that and where John gets that, because that's what you're going to see. You're going to see this cosmic catastrophe in Revelation 6, 12 through 17. So here we go. Verse 12, chapter 6, when he opened the sixth seal. Remember, we've got this lawsuit covenant thing going on in chapter 4 and 5. You've got a throne room scene. You've got a courtroom scene. You've got a divine council scene. It's a legal proceeding, and a case has been brought, and the people of God in chapters 2 and 3, the church, has been judged. I have found you wanting in these ways, and it gets corrected because in chapter 4 and 5, in the heaven scene, in the throne room scene, guess who's there? The people of God. And so they have changed their ways and they have overcome, and so they are present. And one of the things that's presented in this lawsuit covenant proceeding is a legal document, a scroll, sealed with 7 seals. And what we're seeing with the opening of the 7 seals is these different judgments that are unfolding. The church has been judged and passed. Now it's judgment of the nations for their sin, but also for the way they've treated the church, the way they've treated the people of God. And so you get this opening of these seals. Now here's another reason why we say it's probably not to be understood sequentially. This happens, then this happens, then this happens. but probably to be understood simultaneously, because think about it. If you had a scroll and you opened a seal, you still can't read it. If you opened 2 seals, you couldn't read it until you took them all off and unrolled it. But you're having these things happen before the scroll is completely open, which leads us to say we're probably seeing these things happen simultaneously rather than sequentially. And again, that flies in the face of the way a lot of people like to read the book of Revelation. All that to say that this time of judgment is going to be a chaotic time. So when he opened the 6th seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth. The full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth. Now, if you've been with us right along in our study on Tuesday night, our second look study, when you see that phrase, the stars of the sky fell to the earth, there are all kind of bells and whistles that should go off, and you're connecting things. We're going to do a little bit of connecting, because those stars are in all probability not celestial stars, but we're talking about supernatural beings, divine beings, okay? And the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll. That's in some of our hymns and songs. The sky vanished like a scroll that's being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone, slave, free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. Okay? For the great day of their wrath has come. Okay? And who can stand? Kind of odd, what you've got here is a lamb displaying wrath. But don't forget, when the 4 horsemen were unleashed and the judgment time of the nation starts, judgment for their sin, judgment for their rebellion, judgment for how they've treated the people of God. When the judgment of the nation starts at the beginning of chapter 6, who is the one who initiates that? It's the Lamb. The judgment starts from the Lamb who is at the throne, okay? So wrath of the Lamb seems like an oxymoron, but there it is. Now what happens, and on your sheet here, under Revelation 6, 12 through 17, there are a number of verses. I put some of them on the board for those that are watching online. But what this section is going to do that we've just read is we're going to see that it brings together, it conglomerates, it brings together a whole bunch of Old Testament passages. We're not going to run them all down, but every single phrase in here is borrowed. It's been appropriated. It's been repurposed by John. This phrase, this section here that we just read is chock full of Old Testament. We won't run it all down, but we will run some of it down. And there is one scholar, Michael Heiser, says what John has done here is thrown everything in the blender to make this passage. He's borrowed from Isaiah. He's borrowed from Zechariah. He's borrowed from here and Ezekiel. And he's just thrown it all in the blender, Heiser says, to see how he can describe what he's seeing. I've introduced you to an excellent scholar by the name of G.K. Beale. My friend Tracy, the pastor of the Reformed Church, has loaned me his copy of, he has Beale's commentary. In fact, Beale was one of his teachers. But anyway, G.K. Beale is a fascinating commentator, and he is a leading light in this idea that what John is doing is repurposing the Old Testament for very specific reasons and very specific ends. Anyway, Beale, when he looks at this passage where Heiser says John has thrown everything into a blender, he's a little more poetic, and he says what we've got here is a quarry. and John is pulling things, a shard here and a chip there out of the quarry to make this passage. So let's take a look at it, okay? it's a blender full. It's a quarry of texts. So those that are here, let's look at some of these. Isaiah 13, 10 through 13. Somebody read that for us. And as you listen to these, listen for the way you're hearing things that sound a lot like what we just read in chapter 6. That's intentional. So who's got it? Isaiah 13, 10 through 13. Deborah, you got it? Go ahead.
For the stars of the heavens and their constellations will not flash forth their light. The sun will keep back when it comes out, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. And I will punish the world for its evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. And I will put an end to the pride of the arrogant, and I will bring forth the haughtiness of tyrants low. I will make immunity more rare than gold, and humankind more than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will quake from its place, because the wrath of Yahweh of hosts, and in the day of his anger, burns.
All right. Eldon, I'm going to ask you to get ready with chapter 24 of Isaiah, verses 1 through 6. But what we've got here, what we're looking at in this particular passage, is language that talks about the dissolution of the cosmos. This is cosmic catastrophe language, classic cosmic catastrophe language that John is borrowing, in this case from Isaiah, okay? And he reworks it, he repurposes it. He, as Heiser says, he puts it in a blender, and he comes up with what we've got here in chapter 6. Take a look in Isaiah 24, 1 through 6.
his masters. As with the maid, so with her mistress. As with the buyer, so with the seller. As with the lender, so with the borrower. As with the creditor, so with the debtor. The earth shall be utterly empty and utterly plundered, for the Lord has spoken his words.
Okay, that's 1 through 6. Eldon, just drop down to 19 through 23, same chapter. Isaiah 24.
What verse?
19 through 23. And it continues, you'll see, it continues the same theme.
The earth is utterly broken. The earth is split apart. The earth is violently shaken. The earth staggers like a drunken man. It sways like a hut. Its transgressions lies heavy upon it, and it falls, and it will not rise again. And on that day the Lord will punish the host of heaven in heaven, and the kings of the earth on the earth. They will be gathered together as prisoners in a pit. They will be shut up in a prison. After many days they will be punished. Then the moon will be confounded, and the sun ashamed. And the Lord of hosts reigns on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and his glory will be before his elders.
So there you see, I mean, that passage is just full of this cosmic catastrophe language, the tropes, the pictures, the metaphors, the images. And that's exactly what we get in Revelation 6. This is where John is getting it. Okay? Let's take a look at, now that's Isaiah. Let's take a look at Ezekiel, two very different kinds of prophets. Ezekiel is maybe the most visionary of the prophets, and some of his visions border on the bizarre. Isaiah is a poet. He's as fine a poet as you'll find in the ancient world. And so he comes at it a little bit differently, but you'll see similarities. Take a look in Ezekiel 32. Matthew, do you have it? 32, 6 through 8.
Yeah. I will drench the land, pouring out your blood on the mountain, filling up the ravines with you. When I extinguish you, I will cover the heavens and darken all its stars. The sun I will cover with clouds. The moon will not give light. All the shining lights in heavens I will darken over you. I will spread darkness over your land. Oracle of the Lord God.
That's good. You're starting to see a pattern emerge, right? You're hearing some of the same things. This is classic day of the Lord, apocalyptic, visionary, the cosmos is falling apart language. And John uses it. Now, he sees something. And he's trying to get us to see what he sees. He's trying to convey something to us. One of the things he's trying to convey, and when we get to another passage in Isaiah, we'll see it even more. But one of the things that he's trying to do is to show us that during the time that there is judgment on humans for their rebellion and for their treatment of God's people, at the same time there's going to be judgment on divine beings for their rebellion and for their treatment of God's people, because they are the powers behind the humans who persecute God's people and cause trouble. And so that's one of the things that John is doing when he's borrowing from these passages. We're going to see one in Isaiah very, very clearly in a minute, that both things are happening at the same time. And that's what John is trying to convey with his choice of passages here. Now, the reason I bring that up is because this passage and several others, there are people that look at Revelation and they see the armies of China and the armies of Russia and the armies of this and that, and they see human armies. And what they're missing is that at the same time, remember, simultaneously, God is also judging these supernatural powers. Which goes back to the first verse that we ever looked at in this whole study 3 years ago or whatever it's been, Psalm 82, where the divine council is summoned. Yahweh is in the middle. He is God Most High, but there are these other Elohim, these other divine beings. Remember, there are many Elohim, the word we translate God. There are many Elohim, divine beings. Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. That's the point. He's God Most High. And he's surrounded by his council. He's surrounded by the host. And in this particular instance, Psalm 82, he's called them together because some of them have failed. They have failed, apparently, and abused their power over humans. And you could go back and read how they've done that and what he is bringing them to task for. But he ends up in Psalm 82 saying to those fallen powers, those powers that will become rival gods, what Paul will tell us are demons. He tells them at the end of Psalm 82, because of what you have done, failed to do, you've abused your power, you will die like men. The day of judgment will come, and I will get you for what you've done here. But he ends Psalm 82 saying, but what I tasked you to do, I will finish. And that is to bring all the nations back. Because they were allotted to the nations, and some of them abused their authority. But God says, I will eventually make it all right, and I will be the one to bring the nations back. And of course, he does that through Christ. But that's what John is trying to show us here. That when the judgments of Revelation begin to unfold, it is not simply, as some prophecy teachers say, these human armies that are being referenced here, but with language like we read about the stars of heaven and all of that. We're going to see he's talking about supernatural as well as natural that will be judged. Take a look in Joel. Joel 2, verse 10, and then drop down to verse 30 through 31. Deborah, I'm going to come back to you. Go ahead.
And I will set wonders in the heavens and on earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. The sun will be changed to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and awesome day of Yahweh.
Some of this will be quoted on the day of Pentecost by Simon Peter, because they're beginning to see that things are being set in motion, and so he uses some of these references too. Take a look in Joel 3:15. Read that for us, Deborah.
3:15.
Yes, ma'am.
The sun and the moon grow dark, and the suns have withheld their splendor. And Yahweh roars from Zion. From Jerusalem he utters his voice, and the heavens and the earth shake. But Yahweh is a refuge for his people and a protection for the children of Israel.
So here we've got it. More of this cosmic catastrophe language. Let's look at one last one. Dana, do you have Habakkuk there? Okay, Habakkuk 3, 6 through 11, a little bit longer passage. But again, we're seeing this language that's used over and over again in the Old Testament. The dissolution of the cosmos, it's all falling apart. But John didn't make it up, he borrows it. What's he say? What's Habakkuk say?
And caused the earth to shudder. He looked and caused the nations to jump. Yes, the everlasting mountains were shattered, the ancient hills collapsed. His paths are everlasting. I saw the tents of Cushan under distress. The tent curtains of the land of Midian were trembling. Did the Lord rage against the rivers? Or was your anger against rivers? Or was your rage against the sea, that you rode on your horses, on your chariots of salvation? You removed your bow from its holder, the arrows of your bird were sworn. You divided the earth with rivers, the mountains saw you and quaked. The downpour of water swept by. The deep raised its voice, it lifted high its hands. Sun and moon stood in their lofty places. They went away at the light of your arrows, at the radiance of your flashing spear.
So with Isaiah, with Ezekiel, with Joel, it's the same with Habakkuk, and there are others what we could look at. Amos would come in there too. I've given you further. We're not going to look at all of those. Jeremiah, even many beyond that. But they all have this flavor of apocalypse, right? This Old Testament flavor of apocalypse. And John is repurposing what they've said, but he's not the only one. There's some familiar passages that you know well if you're a Bible reader. Matthew 24, Mark 13, Acts 2, where again he's quoting Joel. Let's take a look at those, because you're familiar with Matthew 24. Johnny Cash used to sing, Matthew 24 is knocking at your door. These are end-time passages. These are apocalyptic passages. And we're going to see that John is not the only one who borrows and repurposes. Take a look in Matthew 24, 29. Somebody read that for us. Eldon, you find it? Go ahead.
Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven will be shaken.
That's exactly what we're talking about. In our Revelation 6, it says, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth. He's repurposing, but so was Matthew when he has Jesus talking about these things. Jesus is repurposing, you see? So it's a common thing. John is not the only one doing it. Take a look in Mark 13, 24 through 25. You got it already, Deborah? Go ahead.
But in those days after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the suns will be falling, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken.
So you've got the synoptic gospels in their apocalyptic passages. they do this. They do what John's doing. But also in Dr. Luke, in Acts chapter 2, on the day of Pentecost, verse 19 through 20. Now this is a kind of a paraphrase quote from Joel 2, but let's take a look at it. Who's got it? Acts 2, 19 through 20. This is one of the things Peter said to that huge assembled crowd on the day of Pentecost.
And I will display wonders in the sky above, and signs on the earth below, blood, fire, and vapor of smoke. The sun will be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and glorious day of the Lord comes. And it shall be that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Men of Israel, listen to these words. Jesus the Nazarene, a man attested to by God with miracles and wonders and signs which God performs through him in your midst, just as you yourselves know. This man delivered over by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God, you nailed to a cross by the hands of godless men and put him to death.
But the granddaddy of them all, the one text that it seems John is really drawing on, and is the most influential passage for Revelation 6, especially verses 13 through 14, that we've been looking at, is Isaiah 34, 1 through 4. Take a look at what it says. Draw near, O nations, to hear. Give attention, O peoples. Let the earth hear and all that fills it. This is that familiar he who has an ear to hear thing. The world and all that comes from it. For the Lord is enraged against all the nations. Remember this, we're looking at the unfolding of judgment on the nations. The church has been judged. Jesus will say in those letters to the churches, I have this against you, to each one of them. But if you take care of it, and you repent, and you get it right, you're going to be an overcomer. Well, apparently they got it right because they're present in chapter 4 and 5 in the throne room. They're part of the divine council now. Along with the holy ones that are divine, you've got holy ones that are human. But then, with Revelation 6, begins judgment on the nations. For the Lord is enraged against all the nations and furious against all their host. That word host is very important. We're going to deal with it here in a second a little bit more. It means armies. We've talked about that before. But that's a key phrase, their host. So God is angry at the nation and he's angry at their host. Okay? If you've got a physical Bible, and as I say, your mom allows you to mark in your Bible, circle that their host. He's angry at the nations, but he's also angry at their host. Goes on, he has devoted them to destruction. Okay? We're not going to do it, but that destruction language is really prominent in the Old Testament too, especially in the days of Moses and Elijah. There's a whole genre of destruction language. Anyway, he has devoted them to destruction. He has given them over for slaughter. Their slain shall be cast out, and the stench of their corpses shall rise. The mountains shall flow with their blood. I told you the guy's a poet. All the host of heaven shall rot away, and the skies roll up like a scroll. Again, this Isaiah 34 is the passage for understanding and influencing Revelation 6. All the host of heaven shall rot away. The host of heaven. Go back to Psalm 82. You will die like men. And the skies roll up like a scroll. We see that in Revelation 6. And all their hosts shall fall. Okay? Their hosts shall fall. As leaves fall from the vine. Like leaves falling from the fig tree. So verse 4, I mean, that is really the pivot point of it all. All the host of heaven shall rot away, and skies roll up like a scroll. All their hosts shall fall as leaves fall from the vine, like leaves falling from a fig tree. I mean, they're hosts. We spent some time talking about these different names and terms that are used for divine beings. And some of the terms that are used for divine beings talk about their task, their job, like angel. It means messenger. That's a type of divine being. What do? They deliver a message. They don't initiate it. They deliver. Whatever God says to say, go say this. So you get angels saying, thus saith the Lord. But there are other names that touch on their nature. Not just their function, not just their job description, but touch on their nature. Words like spirit and other words. And one of those words is the word host. It means armies. The idea that the divine beings are in these groupings, in these armies, it occurs over, you've heard it. The God of hosts, the Lord of hosts, the host of heaven. Talking about the armies of heaven, supernatural armies. But in Isaiah 34, when you look at Isaiah 34 in the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament, which is the Bible that Paul and Jesus most often would have used, because that's the common language of the day. When you look in the Greek version, the Septuagint of Isaiah 34, it uses the word dynamis, Greek word dynamis, powers. Where it says the host of heaven, it says the powers, the dynamis of heaven. And that's a word that Paul we've spent a lot of time doing this. Powers is a word that Paul will use over and over again for supernatural powers of darkness, principalities and powers. That's why in the famous Romans 8, at the end of Romans 8, nothing will separate us from the love of God. And it mentions powers, principalities and powers. They cannot separate us from the love of God. But that's the word that's used here in the Greek version of Isaiah 34, where it says host, it says powers, dynamis. Paul's word for supernatural powers of darkness. And the powers of the heavens will melt, and the heaven will be rolled up like a scroll, and all the stars will fall as leaves fall from a fig tree. Well, if you go back to Revelation 6 in verse 13 and 14, he's going to be using the Septuagint. It seems that way. It looks that way. When he says, and the stars of heaven fell to the earth as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind, and the heaven was split as a scroll having been rolled up. So he's drawing from Isaiah 34. And he's putting other passages in there. We've run some of them down, not nearly all. But again, that celestial, Old Testament celestial language was also present during the Second Temple period. Jesus is a Second Temple Jew. Paul is a Second Temple Jew. That's that period we think of between the Testaments. And it wasn't a silent period. It wasn't a time when things were dead. It was a time when people were talking about the Word, they were writing about the Word, they were speculating about the Word, they were trying to dissect it and figure it out in a way that they never had before. That's the era that gives rise to the synagogue. The synagogue is not where you went to worship. The synagogue is where you went to study, to look at the Word, to dissect the Word, to argue over the Word. That's why when you see Jesus in these discussions, that's just par for the course. It's not a case where people are being, singling him out for criticism or cruelty. That's the way you did things in those days. You got a discussion started, usually with a pointed question, and then you took opposing sides so that you could get to some kind of meaning. What does it mean? Well, I think this. On the one hand, this. On the other hand, that. And you just went at it. And Jesus was a master at that. But that was the Second Temple period. And during that period, they're talking about a lot of this stuff too. Before we leave tonight, we're going to look at a Second Temple document, not in your Bible. But they talk a lot about celestial catastrophe. during that time. There's a lot of things that have survived, and where you get this language like you see in Revelation 6 and like you see in Isaiah 34. The Second Temple Jewish people, they were neck deep in all of that. And they recognized and they talked about the time coming when God would judge humans that were in rebellion, humans that had persecuted God's people, and would at the same time judge divine beings that had done the same. Okay? So it's not surprising to see John doing that. What I'm saying is that when you read this chapter 6, it could be talking about human armies and all of that come under judgment and are moving around and positioning. But we can't lose sight of the fact that it's also talking about divine beings that will be judged during all this time, okay? The supernatural powers will be judged as well. Anyway, we looked at what Matthew does in his chapter 24, what Mark does in chapter 13 of his gospel, and they're all talking about that time when spiritual powers are going to get what's coming to them. Again, Psalm 82, okay? Psalm 82. And I just harp on this a little bit because there are lots of end-time systems. They're only thinking about earthly things. The judgment is only on the earth. No. What these passages seem to be saying and what John is trying to get us to see is that divine beings are going to be judged as well. And that word dynamis, for all their hosts, powers, that is really important. And that is what causes us to say what we're seeing here in Revelation, especially in Revelation 6, is a judgment that's beyond an asteroid catastrophe with all this stars falling language. And again, there are prophecy teachers that will say, well, this is all these heavenly things that are going on. Maybe so. But it's also a reference to these divine beings. That kind of star, that kind of heavenly being is going to be cast to the earth. When he talks about the stars of heaven falling, he's not just talking about asteroids and comets and that sort of thing. He's talking about the stuff we've been talking about. These beings will be judged. Psalm 82. Judgment of cosmic powers is part of what's coming into play when you see this cosmic catastrophe language. It's not just planets and stars. And what are we talking about? This is the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. That's what we're talking about. And when you think about it, if John is going to talk about judgment on the nations for the way they have treated the people of God, it's not very likely that he's going to leave out a mention of the judgment that will occur to the divine beings, the powers of darkness, the powers that are behind that. Because it is the powers of darkness that are behind the persecutions that humans are causing for the people of God and the rebellion. They are behind that. So you would expect that John would include that. And that's part of what that falling stars language is all about. Again, it's used a lot in the Second Temple era. I want to close with reading a couple passages for you from a document we call First Enoch. It's in that Second Temple material, Dead Sea Scrolls, that kind of stuff. Now, it's not the Bible, but people that were informed by the Bible wrote some of this. This is their commentary, their speculation, how it might happen. But what's interesting is that they're using the very same language that you see in Revelation. Okay? So this is just the atmosphere that people like John the Revelator, this is what they live in. Here's a passage, if you care, and you can look this up online, by the way, it's free. First Enoch, if you're care to look it up, it's in 1 Enoch, and that's really important. 1 Enoch chapter 18. Now, we don't have the whole thing. I've seen pictures of the Dead Sea Scrolls and 1 Enoch and all of that, and there are big wormholes here and a worn out place here, and you can't read it there. And so we don't have anything like the complete 1 Enoch. But of the passages we do have, here's a complete passage. Chapter 18 of 1 Enoch, verse 13 rather. There I saw 7 stars like great burning mountains. Now, see if you don't hear echoes of what we've just been working through. To me, when I inquired about them, the angel said, "This place is the end of heaven and earth. This has become a prison for the stars and the hosts of heaven." Okay? So again, we're not in this catastrophe language. We're not just talking about asteroids and stars that are up in the sky, in space. We're talking about divine beings. Became a prison for the stars and the hosts of heaven. These are the stars that are rolling over in the fire. These are they that transgress the command of the Lord. Psalm 82. You will be judged. You will die like men. If you care to look it up later, same book, 1 Enoch, chapter 21. And again, if you look this up, there's no complete anything here. It's just fragments. But we got this fragment. I saw neither heaven above nor firmly founded earth, but a chaotic and terrible place. And there I saw 7 of the stars of heaven bound and thrown in it together like great mountains and burning in fire. Well, there are a number of others in 1 Enoch, but that's a couple places where it sounds an awful lot like what John's doing here, doesn't it? And it sounds an awful lot like what Isaiah was doing and what Ezekiel was doing and the others were doing. This is just the way these people thought. And this is the way they express themselves. 1 Enoch, in those couple passages, but in others, he uses phrases about falling stars, about these characters he calls the Watchers, which are supernatural powers that are in rebellion. Ezekiel will use that term a couple of times too. These fallen gods of the nations, however you want to say it. So you get those images over and over again. It's this language about the dissolution of the cosmos, this catastrophe language about the creation. It's not just about the physical creation. It's language that's describing supernatural powers in rebellion and the enemies of the people of God and what happens to them. So that's what you're getting there, okay? Well, listen, we're going to stop there. Seems like a good place to stop. So thanks for joining us if you're online, and we'll see you guys later.